Welcome to this virtual public meeting for the I-55 Corridor Improvements Conceptual Study. My name is Lorna Godwin of Vector Communications, and I have the pleasure of being your meeting facilitator for this evening. Vector is providing public engagement and communication services for this study, working with the prime contractor, who is WSP, on behalf of the Missouri Department of Transportation. Thank you for your interest in the I-55 Corridor Improvements Project and being here this evening. This is the second of two virtual meetings that we've had this afternoon. The same information was presented earlier at 4 o'clock. We just wanted to give people two options to participate. The primary goal of this meeting is to present the project team's analysis of the corridor's current conditions and to get your feedback. In other words, is this what you experience when you travel the corridor? Our agenda for this evening is as follows. After this welcome, we will have project team introductions, then an overview of the I-55 Corridor Improvements Project, what will happen during this conceptual study phase, review of the corridor's existing conditions, then we will take your comments and/or questions. We will conclude with next steps. So that's our agenda for our time together. All of you are on mute so everyone can hear clearly. If you have a question and/or comment, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can send your questions anytime during this meeting, as well as your comments. When it comes time to answer questions and acknowledge your comments, I will read them out loud. Please know that you will also have the opportunity to comment by completing our online public meeting comment form on our project website. I will tell you more about that later in the meeting. Now, to introduce the consulting team is Will Crussell of WSP. Will, please introduce yourself and your team members.
Thank you, Lorna. As Lorna said, my name is Will Crussell. WSP is the consultant team that MoDOT has hired to help assess and evaluate the corridor. With me tonight is Mike Doldy to cover traffic and safety, and Jennifer Pangborn with stakeholder engagement. Turn back to you, Lorna.
Yes, thanks, Will. And there are two more members of the WSP consultant team, and that is Cordell Whitlock and Gabriella Bloom of Vector Communications. Cordell is new to our team as of this past Monday, and Gabriella is part of this meeting, but you can't see her because she is behind the scenes running the back office for this meeting. So thanks, Gabriella, for that. Now, Jen Becker of MoDOT will introduce herself and her colleagues. Then she will give an overview of the I-55 Corridor Improvements Project and this current conceptual study phase. Jen?
Thanks, Lorna. As Lorna said, my name is Jen Becker, and I'm a project manager for MoDOT. It is my job to lead the study of the I-55 corridor for this study phase. With me tonight, I have Tom Blair, who is our St. Louis District Engineer, and Tom Evers, who is the St. Louis District Assistant District Engineer. I also have with us Stephen O'Connor, who is the Franklin and Jefferson County Area Engineer, and Sean Tooley, who is a Transportation Planner for MoDOT. I'm also supported by some fabulous folks from MoDOT's Communications Department, Charlene Gostin and Marie Elliott.
Thanks, Jen. For the past few months, the technical consultants have been studying the corridor's current conditions, or what we like to call in transportation planning, the existing conditions. These conditions include traffic, the interchanges, safety, bridges, and utilities. They will now present what they learned about each, then walk you through the corridor, and then we'll get your feedback. Will, I turn it back over to you.
Actually, Lorna, it's still me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I jumped the gun. Sorry about that.
No worries. Just to kind of kick off, give you a brief overview of what this project entails. We are studying I-55 from just north of the Peabody interchange there on the left side of the screen where the current 3-lane section ends. And we're covering about 8 miles of I-55 past the Herculaneum McNutt exit, the Festus Route A exit, and the Route 67 exit, to about a mile south just before the bridge over the railroad tracks. We're also studying US 67 from where 61 splits off down to the Route CC intersection. MoDOT has committed funding for this project in fiscal year 2024. However, we are just now beginning the process of identifying those improvements. So there's nothing defined right now. What this corridor study allows us to do is it allows us to determine the needs in the corridor. We are currently in the first phase documenting the existing conditions. During the summer, we have taken a look at the engineering factors, and we're reaching out during this public meeting phase to get public input into, are the things that we're seeing on the engineering side really your lived experiences of the corridor? We'll move into a second phase through the fall here, where we look at various alternatives to address the problems that we identify in the corridor. As we wrap up the analysis of those alternatives, we will engage in another public meeting this winter that will allow you to provide input onto which part of the alternative you would prefer. Again, as I mentioned, we have a budget set for funding in 24, but we're not trying to design a project to a specific budget. We're really going to look at what the needs of the corridor are, and if needed, determine how to fund future improvements, whether by adding more money to the funding in 24 or phasing the project over multiple years. We'll continue to do this throughout the spring and summer of next year by continuing our engineering analysis and public engagement. Now, Lorna, I guess it'll go straight to Will.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that, Jen, and Will, take it away.
All right, thank you, Jen and Lorna. Just to kind of zoom out a little bit and talk about the corridor in the context of where it fits in the region, and then even nationally, if you think about Interstate 55, it essentially connects Chicago to New Orleans. So there are definitely people that use this corridor that are not starting in the region or ending in the region, much less your specific neighborhood. Additionally, Mississippi River, barge traffic, et cetera, there is a lot of freight that comes up and down this corridor as well, whether it's generated from within the corridor or just traveling through. So just kind of a little context in that sense. People transporting goods, people are commuting, people are using the corridor for recreation, and then simple local access to get to shopping or to visit friends as well. As you likely know, the project is roughly 30 miles from downtown St. Louis. It does start, as Jen indicated, in Peevely, goes through Herculaneum, also includes Festus and Crystal City. It's more than 7 miles. It's close to 8 miles of interstate. Includes the 4 interchanges, and it also includes, as Jen said, 67 over to Route CC. So we took a closer look then at some of the existing conditions in the corridor. So this is a map zoomed, it's rotated. So north is to the left now instead of up, south is to the right. And we'll kind of walk through some of the existing conditions we've identified from north to south. So starting at Peevely, this is essentially where the 3-lane section ends at the ramps to the Peevely interchange. So if you're familiar with that, as they end, the southbound lane on the highway just takes you right down that ramp. So if you ever notice, some people maybe perhaps not familiar enough with the corridor might get caught in that lane and feel the need to jump over to continue south. There's a couple of railroads at this interchange, the BNSF Railroad to the north and then UP Railroad to the south. Those two do constrain the corridor some, that they cross close to where the ramps connect to the highway. And it also forces, if you look at the horizontal curves, before and after the BNSF crossing to the north, it does influence the geometry of the highway as it crosses the railroads. So those are just some considerations there. Looking at the interchange itself, underneath the highway, Route Z has developed through the years. It's been widened over time. Current configuration, there's lanes actually on both sides of the bridge, I-55 bridge columns, which tends to lead to a little bit of confusion at this one. Additionally, 55 is kind of in a sag vertical curve. There's a low point in the 55 profile near Route Z, and then Route Z is underneath 55. So what starts to happen is the ramps, if you will, from Z up to 55, if you're entering the highway, you're climbing a good distance in a short amount of time. And then when you connect to 55, you're still climbing. So it takes some vehicles, larger trucks, others, a longer time to accelerate and get up to highway speed. So it makes connecting to the highway a little bit challenging. And then additionally, the ramps when you're exiting the highway, sometimes traffic on Route Z backs up the ramps a bit, and you've got just a shorter distance to brake, which presents some challenges as well. Moving down the corridor, Mike's highlighting Joachim Creek, where that crosses 55. It's 55 is in a good location, well enough above the high water elevation, so that there is no risk of the water impounding on 55 like it might be current condition of the bridge on 61, 67 just to the east, closer to the Mississippi River. That said, it is two more long bridges over the carrying 55 traffic over the creek, so it is another constraint along the corridor. The Herculaneum exit, similar to the Route Z exit, the Peevely exit in a number of manners. The low point in the 55 profile, steeper ramps. It has had widening through the years, and this one may be a little bit more unique than the Peevely interchange, in that if you're in the center lanes underneath between the two bridge columns underneath, you're essentially turning left onto the highway, whether you had planned to do that or not. So there are some people that maybe get surprised as they're driving through there. Again, those that are not familiar. And then compounded, there are large gas stations, truck stops at these two locations where you do tend to have a lot of truck volume climbing the steep ramps, and other out-of-towners that might not be as familiar. So there's a couple of challenges there. Continuing south, there's another BNSF railroad crossing right here that I think that bridge was replaced in the last 5 to 10 years. So that's a relatively new improvement over the highway, or for the highway corridor there. Looking at the Festus interchange, one of the more challenging ones is in the southbound direction, exiting 55. Most ramps in the state, you tend to have a parallel lane where you can slide into and start to slow down, and then take the ramp. In this particular case, there's not a whole lot of length developed for that parallel lane, so you tend to end up needing to slow down on the interstate, or some people take that exit at a pretty high rate of speed, and then you got a short ramp with a tight curve at the top to navigate to get through there. And then the curbs from a highway entering north or south on 55, you've got a dual lane, 2 lanes turning, kind of a small radius through those curves to get to the ramp, and then those 2 lanes become one, and then by the time you get to the bottom of the ramp, you're merging onto 55. So sometimes a little bit challenging to get up to highway speed, and then once you're at highway speed next to just kind of pacing yourself, merging with traffic. Challenging in the southbound direction. It's a little bit more challenging with the large number of vehicles that are trying to that are already on 55 south and trying to head south on 67, crossing people that are getting on there at Festus. That just a lot of vehicles in a small area that tends to become a little bit challenging. The opposite is the case in the northbound direction. That additional lane that was just added for the southbound, that's not there for you in the northbound direction. So if you're entering from 61, 67 heading north, you really have to get up to highway speed pretty quick. There is no extra lane for you to take, and then especially if you're getting off at the Festus interchange, you're accelerating pretty quickly, and then in a very short amount of time you're decelerating to get off the highway. So just some challenges there. And then additionally, looking at the 67 interchange, it's an older cloverleaf interchange, and there's two predominant movements as far as heavy movements in the evening, southbound 55 to southbound 67, and then the morning the opposite way, northbound, taking that tight, I think it's the tightest of the 4 loop ramps, to climb that hill, navigate a tight curve, and then when you get to the top of the hill, at the end of the curve, you're joined with I-55 and really need to accelerate pretty quickly to get up to speed with the 70-mile-an-hour traffic. So those are some of the challenges along the corridor. There's also a number of bridges over the railroads, over Route Z, McNutt. There's some over some of the local roads in Festus, north of the Festus interchange, that are in various conditions. So assessing those as we go along to see what type of constraints those might become, and then also considering utilities along the corridor that either run along the corridor or are crossing. You might have seen some people out there. There's a number of people locating utilities, and then we've got some survey crews down there surveying in where those utilities are located. At that, I will turn it over to you, Mike, to continue talking about traffic.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, I'm going to talk about traffic, and a lot of our traffic conditions are directly impacted by these geometric issues that Will just described, and we'll touch upon those a little bit as we go through the corridor again from north to south. We've color-coded I-55 to represent the congestion throughout the day or during the peaks on I-55. So where you see green is where the data indicates that there's minimal congestion. Yellow would be mild congestion, and red would be heavy congestion. So as we step from the north to the south, as Will mentioned, north of the Peevely exit, we have 3 lanes that then drops to 2, and that's where we see our traffic go from green to red. So in this area, we have about 71,000 cars per day that use this section of I-55. South of Peevely exit, we have about 66,000. So just a few thousand less, but the capacity is reduced by 33% as we go from 3 lanes to 2 lanes. So as you see here, this would be in the afternoon, our traffic conditions show a lot of heavy congestion. And this is really looking at how much volume we have to how much capacity we have. And we're really kind of at that tipping point where things can break down real easy. And we know we have a lot of incidents along this stretch of I-55 and throughout the corridor. And even the smallest incident, even just a car on the shoulder, can really disrupt traffic and tip that traffic over into really congested conditions where it's, that stop and go traffic that you probably see very often. Under normal conditions, it can it can handle that, but it's very close to that point where we just don't have that extra capacity for that reliability that we would typically want. Some of the other geometric issues that disrupt traffic, as well mentioned, the ramps here at the Peevely exit, quite steep to climb up to grade to get onto 55 at a very short distance. We actually have a very heavy truck percentage on these ramps. In 55 on general on the main line, we have about 16% of all traffic is trucks, large semis. And on these ramps, it's even higher, about 19%. So with the truck stops here, we do get a lot of that truck traffic, and that truck traffic has, you know, a much tougher time getting up to speed, and can definitely cause some issues underneath the interchange, as well mentioned, with the lanes splitting around the bridge columns, adding confusion to drivers, all things that we're looking at when we're trying to analyze these existing traffic conditions. So the yellow you see, that would be for the morning peak on northbound I-55. So the morning is a little bit less than the afternoon, but it does definitely open up as you get north into where 3 lanes opens up, turns green again. So as we move south to the Herculaneum exit, here we have about 60,000 vehicles that use this section of I-55 every day. So a little bit less than what we saw up at Peevely. And as we step down the corridor, we start to lose that traffic at these interchanges. There's a lot of different land use that is pulling that traffic off between restaurants and the truck stops and different retail, but also just a lot of residential in the area. Here at the Herculaneum exit, we do see a lot of congestion at the Herculaneum crossing intersection. This is where both of those truck stops come out. So you get a lot of trucks stacked up on either side trying to get back to 55. And indicating that with the yellow here, but really those side streets are even, I would consider, heavy congestion. Again, we have about 16% of those large trucks on 55, but a higher amount at the interchange itself. As we move south to the Festus interchange, Route A, Festus interchange is the heaviest itself. We have a lot of retail here on the southeast quadrant that draws a lot of traffic, a lot of restaurants in that area. And we're also seeing a lot of new development here on the west, and even a lot of new residential over on the west too. So we know that traffic is growing in this area, and it is already very heavy on Route A itself and at the interchange. On 55 in this section, we're down to about 50,000 vehicles per day that use this section. So as I mentioned, as we go south, we start to drop that traffic. In the section between Festus and 67, as well mentioned, we have that new auxiliary lane. That lane actually has quite a bit of traffic, where a lot of people are destined for 67 south. So they're all trying to get over into that lane, which is driving the yellow in this section. So really that one lane is probably, if we were going to do it by lane, that would be red, while the 2 inside lanes are continuing on 55. They're more at a free flow speed, you know, with the speed limit. So we get a lot of speed differential between those lanes, and we have a lot more congestion in that outside lane and that auxiliary lane. So that's something that we're looking at. And as I mentioned, that traffic is all destined for 67 south. So this ramp from 55 to 67 is definitely, it's, you know, getting to be over capacity. It also has some geometric issues where you're climbing a hill as you progress through the ramp. We have a lot of truck traffic on that ramp, so that truck traffic really slows down anytime they hit those hills, right? And you get that shock wave of cars behind them stacking up that can spill back into I-55. But as they get through that ramp, they also hit additional congestion because there's a even bigger hill as you go south on 67 to the Route CC traffic signal at the crest of the hill. And we see large amount of queuing on this hill back towards the ramp. And you get those trucks in there, hard time getting started. You know, it can take everybody a couple cycles to get through that signal. So that's definitely an issue that we see. So even though traffic has dropped from the north end of the study area, we do have these very congested sections here that we're looking at. And speaking of that traffic, so as I mentioned, we had about 50,000 vehicles per day north of the 67 interchange. There's only about 28,000 that continues on or comes from south of the 67 interchange. So that means we have about 35,000 on 67 itself. So we actually have more traffic on this section of 67 than we do continuing south on 55. So as Will mentioned in the morning, we see that northbound 67 to northbound 55, this very tight loop ramp with a hill that you have to climb. That ramp, much like this ramp, is also getting to be over capacity, and we see a lot of congestion issues on that. Some of these issues also lead into some of the safety issues that we see. And I'm going to address those next. So we'll step back to the north end of the study area again, looking at some of the safety. We've been analyzing all of the crashes. We've been looking at crashes for the last 5 years, so 2016 to 2020. Just a little note on crash data. All the police agencies send in their crash data, and it takes a while to compile all that. So it takes us, we have to go back a little further since we don't have, the database won't have any crash data for the last few months. So that's why we only went through 2020. But here on the map, what we've mapped is the number of fatal crashes, which are obviously very concerning to us. Also the suspected serious injury, also considered disabling injury, and then also minor injury. In total, there's about 2,000 total crashes in that 5-year period that we've looked at. There's also within that a lot of property damage only, so just damage to the vehicles themselves, not injuries. If we left those off the map just because it would overtake everything else, and we really like to focus on where these serious injuries are. So one to note here at the Peevely interchange is a fatal crash at the interchange. This was an out of control crash. A little bit further south, just north of the I-55 raceway, there was a head-on crash that resulted in a fatality. So those are very concerning to us. But in general, you'll see that a lot of these higher injury crashes are usually represented around where the on-ramps and off-ramps come into and out of 55. And that really speaks to what we already mentioned, where you have a lot of hard time for traffic to get up to speed. So you have those speed differentials, which always results in unsafe conditions. Same thing happens at Herculaneum at the interchange there. Groupings of these kind of crashes around the merge points and weaving areas. We also have a few fatalities that we've recorded and found in the data. Obviously, again, very concerning with those. Same thing again here at the Festus interchange. As we've mentioned, these ramps are very short, very little time to decel or accelerate as you get off or on the ramps onto the interstate. So you see these groupings. We did have a fatality here in the northbound lanes in 2017. That was a rear end crash that resulted in a fatality. So 3 more fatalities on the 67 southbound to South 67 ramp. The thing to note on these 3 is those were all in either 2016 or 2017. Since then, MoDOT has constructed the project with the auxiliary lane, but also did a lot of improvements to the ramp itself and improve the sight distance by removing some of the rock bluff that was over here. And we're seeing in the data some improved conditions on safety because of that project that has already been done. So with this project, we'll be looking to continue that and identify and focus on other areas with these serious injuries. One more to note is also seeing the same type of issues on 67 itself. And it's the same areas where we see the geometric issues with the hills and also the traffic issues. So a lot of these are all very intertwined together. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Pangborn to talk about some of the stakeholder input that relate to a lot to the 3 areas that we just mentioned.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. So in addition and in summary to the analysis that Will just talked to regarding the geometry and Mike talked about with traffic and safety, we conducted meetings and interviewed stakeholders along the corridor to get a better understanding of the issues and their perceptions of how things were operating. And here's what we heard from them along the study area. At Peevely, the biggest corridor deficiencies included the evening rush hour bottleneck that starts at Peevely, where the lanes are reduced from 3 to 2 lanes southbound that was already discussed. This is where it gets really congested, and that's where the operations greatly decreases. It was identified that the ramps were too short overall on all of the on and off ramps here at Peevely. And that people felt it's really dangerous when trucks don't have enough time to move over or merge into mainline traffic. It was identified that there were frequently crashes at this location where the lanes drop, and at the spot where the vehicles are entering the interstate specifically, there's definitely a need to get vehicles up to speed. What we heard at Herculaneum, we heard here as well that the ramps are too short and it leads to difficulty merging on and off the interstate, so similar to Peevely. Traffic backs up from these off ramps onto the interstate during the peak hours. Again, really creating some safety concerns and leads to incidents at these locations. Some other areas that were identified that are challenging, the lane geometry at the Herculaneum interchange is where people said that they get stuck in the wrong lane frequently, and that some people even felt that there was unclear signage at this location to note. Emergency responders specifically said that they felt that there were narrow shoulders along mainline in this location, really making it difficult for them to respond to incidents, to pull over on the side and even change somebody's tire that was on the shoulder. So a lot of concern for safety for emergency responders. And then it was noted that all ramps and mainline I-55 at this location have high crash concentrations and just some concerns for safety. And then lastly, at the Festus and 67 interchanges, and I'm gonna group these together real quickly. We heard that these two interchanges are really busy. The close spacing led to some moderate or traffic congestion, and breakdowns with incidents happened really quickly. It was identified that a lot of traffic is weaving between these two interchanges, between the on and off ramps. And at the Festus interchange specifically, some of the issues were identified is that the Festus exit doesn't have a long approach and it's treacherous getting off at such high speeds. The truck traffic here was identified, exacerbating the conditions. It was identified and shared that there is no pedestrian accommodations or sidewalks for people to be walking on, and that there was a desire for people to walk east-west at this location. And it should note that there's a lot of destinations, a lot of places that people are trying to go even east-west, and that there's a lot of concentrations of crashes, even on Route A here, that people really felt there's a lot of congestion and safety issues. And some issues that were identified at 67, that this is a really big interchange, that there's operational issues with the merges and the diverges, the on and off ramps, and specifically between the different loop ramps, both on mainline I-55 and on 67. There was a lot of discussion about the northbound 67 to northbound 55 loop ramp that Mike discussed earlier, and how it operates poorly during all periods of the day. And that there was, again, lots of discussion about the speed differentials on some of these on and off ramps. And then lastly here, just quickly on the Route CC traffic light, there's frequent backups that occur here. It's not uncommon for this location to back up all the way to the I-55 interchange or even sometimes onto interstate mainline. And it was shared how concerning that can be. And then lastly, just some overall study area comments that we received that we wanted to make sure to share. That this corridor is used for emergency vehicles everywhere from the south, from St. Genevieve and St. Francis to access the hospitals in the area and even hospitals in St. Louis City and County. And the corridor is also perceived as really dangerous for all drivers and even scary, especially for some of our younger drivers in high school that may be driving for the first time, traveling in the corridor with the school districts and requirements for students to be driving east-west on some of these routes. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Lorna.
Thank you, Jennifer, and the rest of the WSP team. Now we are ready to answer your questions. Again, if you have a question or comment, either one, please submit it by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now, we have had some questions and comments already come in, so I will start with that. The first question is, thank you for putting this on, and you're welcome. Is there a major price difference to increase from the 2 lanes on the highway to a 4-lane highway instead of a 3-lane highway and having it reach to Highway M? The county, especially the Festus and Crystal City areas, are booming with housing and businesses. Will?
Very good question. I'm going to say yes, there is a major price difference. And part of why I say that is right now, if you think of how the highway was widened north of this study area, they lanes were added to the inside in the median where the ground was generally open. Not a lot of utilities, MoDOT already controlled the right of way, et cetera. So that tends to reduce the cost. It might increase the cost in the sense that the contractor has to work between traffic in both directions, but overall, you don't have to relocate utilities, buy right of way, move things that are outside the right of way out of the way. To go to 4 lanes, one of the challenges is through all of these interchanges, moving all the ramps out. Think of the things that are along and next to and adjacent to the ramps at all the cross streets. And then between the interchanges, there's utilities right away. There's property, residential, commercial, otherwise developed up adjacent to the highway. And to add another lane to the outside, is there room still to add that lane to allow the stormwater to run off the road into a ditch, et cetera, or without impacting where the existing utilities are or where some of the homes and businesses are, things of that nature. So it's not necessarily a simple question to answer in that context. But generally speaking, all things being equal, I guess the cost to go to 4 lanes versus 3 lanes would double because you're adding 2 lanes instead of 1. But that would be ignoring the other constraints that are in there.
Okay, and the next question is, will MoDOT consider a flyover at Route 67 northbound onto I-55 northbound?
Okay, very good question as well. I'll say it this way. At this point, we have not considered anything or ruled anything out. I guess that's a fair way to say where we're at right now. All things are on the table, but nothing is definitely going to happen or definitely not going to happen. So that's, I think, the best way I can answer that one.
Great. What plans are in store around the sand bridge over I-55 between Herculaneum and Festus?
I'll put that in the same category as that the answer to the last question, which would be nothing preconceived. We understand from talking to some of the stakeholders how it's currently used. We understand there may or may not be property developed in that area adjacent to that bridge. I don't think there's any plans necessarily to remove that bridge. It's a bridge over the top of the interstate. If the project were to widen and add a third lane in each direction, there's room under the bridge for that. I guess that's how I'll answer that question.
Okay, the next question. Will the southbound on-ramp at Peevely be looked at? The reason is entering the highway is very dangerous, and on-ramp northbound at Herculaneum gives you very little time to enter the highway. It's also dangerous, and the existing electric lights northbound of Herculaneum need to be looked at. So the question is, will the southbound on-ramp at Peevely be looked at?
Okay, just to clarify, I'm hearing Peevely and Herculaneum, so I'll answer that two different ways, I guess. At the Peevely interchange specifically, if you remember, there's railroads north and south. So that is a constraint. Bridges can be built over the railroad, but it comes with a cost. Like I'm thinking the south end is what we were talking about there. If you can picture where those bridges are, it's very near where the existing ramp connects to the interstate. So it's just a matter of evaluating how that could be addressed. But yes, these are all certainly things that are on the table. With regards to the Herculaneum exit entrances, same thing. I would say the same things are in play there. With regard, I think the railroad would not be a constraint, but there are businesses, properties, utilities. There's other constraints that might restrict what could happen. But all that said, we are identifying that ramp lengths and drivers having the ability to get up to speed has been a challenge so far. So those are things we're looking at.
Great. Do you have the authority to redirect the railroad tracks near Highway Z so the bends in I-55 could be straightened?
I will turn that over to Jen for this one.
Yeah. We do work with the railroads in developing our projects. I wouldn't say necessarily that we have the authority to relocate them, but if we found a need, we could work with them to try to figure out how that may be able to happen. So again, it's not impossible, but it is definitely challenging if we were to need to relocate a railroad as part of our highway improvements. So generally our approach is to just go over the top of them in the most efficient way we can.
Thank you, Jen. The next question is, has any thought been given to an additional overpass over I-55 south of Highway A to take local traffic away from the I-55 Highway A interchange?
Very good question. I will ask Mike to speak to that from a traffic and operations standpoint. Again, collecting information at this point, and we'll be evaluating all things in the next phase. Go ahead, Mike.
Exactly. Well, we haven't got to any alternatives yet, but we are looking at all the traffic within the study area and around the study area, including new developments and new residential houses that are going to be coming into the area. So as we look at what that future traffic will be in the next 5 years, in the next 20 years, we'll start to identify those kind of issues.
Okay, thank you. This next question is about the project timeline. What is the estimated timeline from start to completion of this project? I heard 2024 is a possible start date. Also, will it be done in phases? What would be the starting point?
Those are, again, very good questions. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have money committed in 2024, but since we don't know yet what we're building, we don't know how much it'll cost or what the timeline would look like for being able to build it. So those are all questions that are very much still to be answered as we develop the alternatives. Right now we're in the phase of deciding what needs to be built. The next phase will determine how it needs to be built.
Thank you. There's several questions about construction impact. This question in particular, will the interstate be closed for the improvements, or will one lane be open?
Again, these aren't questions that we can answer at this time because we don't know what we're building. So how we would build it is still up in the air as well. So these are all questions that'll be in sort of the subsequent phases of the project.
And another question that I will read out loud, but can't be answered at this time. If ramps are being considered to be closed, how long will they be closed? And again, we haven't gotten to that stage of the study yet to answer that question.
Correct.
Another question is MoDOT considering this to be a single project for letting and contracting purposes, or multiple projects for letting purposes? If multiple, is there a priority list due to the safety concerns along the stretch of highway?
Again, same answer as before. We don't know yet. Part of studying this is, and engaging in these public feedback sessions, is to sort of start to develop what are the priorities for the community. Where are we seeing the safety issues along the corridor? Where are we seeing the greatest traffic issues along the corridor? And once we know what we need to do and what funding is available when, we'll be able to make our best decisions to try to line up the needs with the dollars and the timing of those dollars.
I think that is all the questions. I do want to share some of the comments that we've received. So if people want to expound on that or to add their comment, they can. One of the comments is there is not enough distance to merge into northbound 55 from northbound 67 Cloverleaf. I hope going to 3 northbound lanes addresses this safety issue. The same stretch is also used to exit northbound 55 to southbound 67 and does not give enough distance to safely merge right to the on-off lane to go southbound on 67. Also, there is no exit lane southbound from southbound 55 to Missouri Route A. I travel south and the exit cuts off the interstate. Installing an actual southbound exit lane to Missouri Route A will give us a chance to get off the interstate and slow before hitting the ramp. Other comments? It would be nice to add another lane from Highway M towards Peabody. And there's some questions. Comment about speed limit signs. You should put speed limit ahead signs on the ramps so people entering the interstate know what the speed limit is ahead. Some other comments. This person says something you can't fix, but drivers will slow down to 55 when they're getting off at the next exit. Drivers will merge on the highway doing 45 to 50 miles per hour. So this also backs up traffic. Next is not really a question, but we have heard that UPS is putting in a hub at Route Z and I-55. So good timing to address. Thanks for the information. And we've heard the same thing, so thank you. Okay, here is, as this person says, I have a comment and a few questions. As a new resident to the area, I couldn't be more excited to have this addition. The on-ramps to access are a significant challenge. What is the estimated timeline from start to completion of this project, which we've talked about already, but wanted to share that comment from a new resident, so welcome. And
we have another question about the construction plan, Lorna.
I am not seeing that question. Would you?
Yeah, so the question is, thank you for taking a look at the area's traffic issues. Is there an estimation of when the construction plan will be determined not necessarily when construction will begin, but when a plan is determined.
Thank you, from Lynn.
Great question. We'll start looking at those questions next spring. So once we have those alternatives, we'll be able to look at our funding sources and kind of what needs to be done in figuring out a plan for how that's going to happen. So that'll take place next year, starting in the spring, probably continuing through the summer.
And I believe that is all the questions and comments. Oh, here comes another one. Thank you. The question is, how will this affect emergency responses to the interstate?
That's always a challenge when looking at a project like this. Emergency responders do need to access across, along, through to respond to incidents that are happening independent of the corridor or along the corridor. So I guess the best way to answer that is coordination has already started early and often. We do intend to fully engage along the way as the plans are being developed, as concepts are being vetted, to really balance a plan that does not overly burden one entity or the other. All that said, it will be lanes will be need to be closed for construction to happen. So the short answer is people will be impacted, but that's big picture. That's a future discussion. Our goal would be to minimize that to the extent that's reasonable.
Right, yes. And just to reemphasize what Will just said, we have already been talking with emergency responders along the corridor. So we always know how important their work is in designing or upgrading a corridor. I don't see any other comments or questions, but I will give everyone.
A few more coming in,
wonderful.
Lorna.
Oh, okay, there are only a couple of emergency cut locations. Will any more be added as the project goes on?
That'll certainly be evaluated. Kind of, I think what if I can visualize what you're referring to, I'm picturing an open median where emergency responders could cross the median and then head north from the southbound or vice versa. That is a concern. It's a risk that that certainly would be evaluated as the project goes on. But no, we don't have a number in mind.
Next question, is there a way to put signs on highways all around Missouri, not just in this corridor, reminding people the left-hand lane is a passing lane and not a lane to drive 10 under the speed limit, backing up traffic on the way to work? Thanks. Jen,
We all need to do our part, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
That's why I had to chuckle over that.
While we all agree that it'd be nice if people drove the way they were supposed to, it's hard to sign for every applicable condition. So, we just do our best to remind drivers in, forums such as this, on our weekly post-dispatch chat that's hosted by MoDOT St. Louis County and St. Louis City. MoDOT will very often mention things about, staying on the right side and driving when you pass, but unfortunately we can't sign for every sort of less than desirable driving behavior.
Thank you, Jen. Next question, will the Joycon Bridge be demolished on 67 in Herculaneum, hopefully before all of this gets started?
We are coordinating with the Route 6167 project and the construction of the new Joachim Creek Bridge there as well. And yes, that is the goal, that the 6167 project is finished before we get started.
Yes. And we have a question about where people can send further questions. And Jen, want to send them to you.
Sure, yes. I will put my email and phone number in the chat so that you'll be able to see that. And also, Gabriella should be posting information to get to the corridor website. Oh, there it is. And we have a comment form there, and my contact information is there as well.
Any other comments or questions? I see one comment, very informative. Thank you for opening this to the public. Of course we would, yes. We would and we should. Thank you for being interested. Any others? I'm scrolling to see if there are any others, and I am looking. Oh, here's one. We will, as business managers and owners, be informed of updates. Yes. Please go to our website and I will give you that information. You see it up on the screen right now, actually, which is modot.org/I-55-corridor-improvements. And Jen Becker's information is in the chat room. Her phone number and email. I'll scroll one last time to see if there are any other questions or comments before we close. So we have a couple of questions to begin. And the first one is, will there be actual shoulders constructed in the new system? It's mentioned that it has caused significant safety concerns not having shoulders.
The short answer is yes. One thing I didn't mention before, that the interstate was originally constructed in the 1960s. Design standards, awareness of different requirements, vehicle capabilities, et cetera, have evolved quite a bit since then. Yes, the improvements will include current standard width shoulders, if not a little bit wider, given the high concentration of truck traffic in the area.
And this person also asked, can we get bigger shoulders in the meantime?
I would say that probably in the meantime, that's not likely to happen, because it sounds like a simple thing, but it does require some significant investment in infrastructure to be able to do that. So with this project coming, it's unlikely that we would do something in the meantime.
Thank you. The next question is about properties. Will MoDOT be acquiring any properties for this project?
That is to be determined. If it wasn't clear before, one of the things we're doing at this stage is really just assessing what the conditions are, identifying where the problems are along the corridor, to come forward with solutions, whether it's safety, traffic congestion, et cetera, to design, to propose a project that will address the problems. All that being said, there are no solutions that have been evaluated or come up with just yet. That's the phase that we are going to start next month. I guess to be determined, I guess is the right answer there. It's not a, it will be limited, likely, but to be determined.
Here's a comment that just came in. At Herculaneum exit on west side of bridge, there is a quick change from 2 lanes to 1 lane as you enter the traffic circle. So I gather that person is suggesting that that area needs to be addressed. Another comment was, someone said that during rush hour, every driver in the house, they don't say how many though, gets off at Peabody and drives down 61, 67. That sort of acknowledges what you were saying earlier. Any other comments or questions? I'll give you a minute to add others. Another comment, which has been mentioned throughout today, there has been extensive growth in these areas, and I see that too will continue. Are we planning long-term because of this anticipated growth?
Right. I'll interject. We have been interviewing different stakeholders within the community, be it first responders, school districts, hospitals, other developers, et cetera. And that is city officials. That is a message that we have been hearing and are also aware of and factoring into the decisions that are being made with regards to modeling the traffic, anticipating the growth, et cetera.
The next question is, what types of problems have been identified at this point in the project? This person realizes that at this point in the project, it may be difficult to determine problems, but wanted to know if any have been identified as of yet.
Yes. Thinking back through what Mike was presenting, with just how close to capacity the existing traffic volume is on the corridor at certain peak hours. That's a problem. Some of the geometry that's out there now, thinking of the lane configurations on McNutt or Route Z underneath 55, the way the ramps align and connect to 55, things of that nature. There's some rock outcroppings throughout the area intermittently. Some of them have guardrail. Some of them, I think, I can't remember if all of them have guardrail, but some of them seem closer to the road than others. There's things of that nature that are happening. Trying to think of others. Obviously, the crashes that we're seeing are a sign of problems. Some of that is it's on us as public to drive responsibly, put the phone down, buckle up, pay attention, give it driving the respect it deserves. But there's also perhaps some things that could maybe be constructed a little bit differently to help reduce the likelihood of some of the crashes as well.
Thank you, Will. The next question for you is, will the improvements include concrete center dividers or cable barriers?
Good question. You've got a combination of both traveling north, starting further north, concrete barrier. Right north of this project, it's the cable barrier. I guess the short answer is it's to be determined how the highway might get widened. Things to consider are where the current lanes are, filling in the median. What do you do with the gap? There's existing bridges over the top of creeks, over the top of railroads, cross streets, et cetera, that if the highway were to be widened, those bridges would have to be altered as well. So there's a number of factors that will go into the evaluation, but I guess the short answer is it's to be determined at this point.
Thank you. There's two people who are sharing their experiences of traveling along the corridor. And one person says that she agrees, she always exits southbound Highway Z to avoid congestion past there. And another person says that in evening rush hour, the traffic will be backed up as far as Barnhart and even Imperial. Any other comments or questions for the team? I'll give you another minute before we close. And another person is sharing their experience. Yes, I have seen it backed up to Arnold and have seen 2 wrecks. Probably including some of the data that Michael collected. Any other comments or questions? Here's a question. Any thoughts on implementing an express lane that could be utilized as both a north and south lane, similar to what we see on Interstate 70 in St. Louis? Will, can you take that one?
Yes, interesting question. Express lanes, reversible lanes that do tend to have their challenges. To build the lane, to put, you need kind of redundant shoulders, if you will. Sometimes you might be better off to add an additional lane in each direction, as opposed to have a single reversible lane, because you got to put in 2 sets of barriers, 2 sets of shoulders, etc. And then just thinking through all the bridges over the top of 55 and then under the bridges of 55 over the top of cross streets, that would impact quite a number of structures, but interesting concept to consider.
I'll also comment that it is an interesting concept, but obviously it would be of limited value in just this short section of 55. So it'd be more of a St. Louis regional thing to actually take it all the way up into St. Louis where it could be useful.
Good point. One person says, gives a compliment. I really appreciate this opportunity and it's been very well organized. Thank you for sharing that comment. Here's another question. Will any flooding issues be taken into consideration? When Jeffco became an island a few years ago, it would have taken me 4 hours to get to work in St. Louis.
So we are certainly evaluating that in the context of this project. It's kind of a bigger question, where was the flooding taking place, et cetera? Was it further north? But what we are looking at in this particular area, there's a number of floodplains that do cross I-55. I think there's 7 within the project limits. Joachim Creek being the largest. All that said, we have not identified any obstacles that are not insurmountable to construct the improvements, design and construct the improvements, and also address the potential for flooding as well.
Any other questions or comments? I'm watching to see if we get another one before I close. I think that is it then. Well, we really appreciate your comments and questions. And even though you commented on this during this meeting, we really want you to complete one of our online comment forms. You can find our public meeting comment form on our project website. It is under the virtual public meetings section, the virtual public meeting section. So make sure you scroll down. Our project website address is modot.org/I-55-corridor-improvements. And you have until Wednesday, October 6th, to submit your comment form. So please do, and encourage your friends and neighbors to also go online and complete a comment form. And it's an opportunity, again, to share your experiences of traveling this corridor and looking at the existing conditions. Lastly, just like we had 2 virtual public meetings today, to maximize public participation, We will have an abbreviated version of what you saw tonight on display at the Peabody City Hall. The display goes up tomorrow morning, September 23rd, and will be up through Wednesday, September 29th. The Peabody City Hall is located at 401 Main Street, of course, in Peabody. And the hours for City Hall are 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. However, we do suggest that you call first just to make sure they're open so you don't drive there unnecessarily to see our information boards. That number to call is 636-475-4452. That's 636-475-4452. And there will be common forms at that display for you to complete if you want to complete a hard copy. So that concludes our meeting for this evening. Thank you so much for attending and being interested in this important project for Jefferson County, the I-55 Corridor Improvements Conceptual Study. We look forward to seeing you again at our next public meeting. In the meantime, have a great evening and stay safe. Good night.